I had worked at Meridian Consulting for 11 years before I found out that the person I trusted most in that building had been lying to me for 4 of them. I want to be precise about the number 4 years. Not a slip, not a misunderstanding, not a thing that happened once and was carried with regret. 4 years of deliberate, sustained, carefully maintained deception, conducted by someone who sat across from me at lunch twice a week and asked about my weekend and remembered the names of my sister's children. My name is Karen. I'm 44 years old. I live in Atlanta, Georgia. I have been in management consulting for 18 years, which means I have spent the better part of my adult life helping organizations understand why their systems aren't working. The irony of this is not lost on me. The person who lied to me was named Mitchell Graves. He was a senior partner at Meridian. He had been my mentor for 6 years before the lying started, and my mentor for 2 years before that, which means I had known him for 8 years total and trusted him for most of them. I want to tell you what happened accurately, which means I have to start not with the lie, but with the thing that made the lie possible, which is to say, I have to start with who I was before I found out. I joined Meridian in 2010 at 32 after 5 years at a smaller firm in Charlotte, where I had been good at my job and underpaid for it and had finally decided that staying comfortable was its own kind of risk. Meridian was a different caliber of firm, larger, more complex, with clients whose names appeared in newspapers and whose problems required teams of people working for months to untangle. The work was harder, the expectations were higher, and the politics, which I had managed to largely avoid in Charlotte because the firm was small enough that everyone knew everyone and there was no room for much maneuvering, were something I had to learn from scratch. Mitchell Graves was the partner assigned to my onboarding. This was standard practice at Meridian. Senior partners took on junior staff for the first year, made introductions, explained the unwritten rules, provided cover when junior staff made the inevitable early mistakes. Some partners did this dutifully and without much investment. Mitchell was not that kind of partner. He was 53 when I met him. Silver-haired, precise, the kind of man who had clearly been attractive in a conventional way 20 years earlier and had aged into something more interesting. Authority, I suppose, combined with the particular ease of someone who had never had to try very hard to be taken seriously. He had been at Meridian for 22 years. He knew everything about how the place worked, who mattered and who didn't, which clients were going to grow and which were going to quietly leave, which internal conflicts were worth engaging with, and which were best left alone. He shared this knowledge with me freely over lunches that started as weekly check-ins and became habitual. He asked questions about my work and listened to the answers carefully and offered feedback that was useful in a way I hadn't experienced from a superior before. Specific, actionable, without the softening that makes feedback easier to receive and harder to apply. He introduced me to clients as one of our best analytical minds, which was generous and also, I think, strategically useful to him, because a junior consultant who performs well reflects on the senior partner who championed her. I understood this dynamic. I was not naive about it. In consulting, sponsorship is currency, and Mitchell was spending some of his on me, and I knew that this came with expectations of performance, of loyalty, of a certain alignment with his way of seeing things. I was comfortable with the exchange. I thought I understood its terms. In 2015, 5 years in, I was up for promotion to principal. In Meridian's structure, principal is the level below partner. It carries significant compensation increases, client relationship ownership, and a seat at certain internal tables that associates and senior associates are not invited to. It was the promotion I had been working toward since I arrived. The promotion decisions at Meridian were made by a committee of senior partners, chaired by the managing director, a woman named Elaine Cho. Mitchell was on the committee. He had told me in the months leading up to the decision that he was supporting my candidacy, that he believed I was ready, that he had been making the case to his colleagues. I did not get the promotion. The feedback I received through the formal channels was that the committee felt I needed more client-facing experience at the senior level, that my analytical work was exceptional, but that client relationship management, the client exposure I needed. That next cycle would be different. I believed him. I went back to work. 18 months later, in 2017, I was up for promotion again. This time I was prepared differently. Mitchell had, true to his word, positioned me on several high-visibility client engagements where I had significant face time with senior executives. I had led difficult conversations about restructuring recommendations that clients didn't want to hear and had delivered them effectively. I had built relationships that were mine, not borrowed from the partners above me. My feedback from clients, which Meridian collected formally at the end of each engagement, was consistently strong. I felt ready. More than ready, I felt for the first time in my career like the work spoke clearly enough that it didn't require interpretation. I got the promotion. I was made principal in November 2017. Mitchell was the one who called me with the news. He sounded genuinely pleased, which I read as genuine because I had known him for 7 years by then, and I believed I could read him. I could not read him. Not the way I thought. Here's what I did not know in November 2017. I did not know that in 2013, 2 years before my first promotion attempt, Mitchell had begun a quiet, deliberate campaign to position a colleague of mine named David Kaplan for the faster track within the firm. David was a senior associate, 2 years my junior, competent and well-liked and politically skilled in a way that I had always recognized without particularly admiring. He and Mitchell had a relationship I was aware of but had not examined closely. They had worked together on a major financial services client. They had lunch sometimes. They seemed to get along well. What I did not know was the nature of that relationship. Specifically, David Kaplan was the son of Thomas Kaplan, a name that meant nothing to me at the time, but which I came to learn much later meant something very specific to Mitchell. Thomas Kaplan was the founder and chairman of a private equity firm that had been in conversations with Meridian about a significant advisory engagement, the kind of engagement that generates 8 figures in fees and reshapes a firm's client portfolio for years. The Kaplan engagement had been in preliminary discussions since 2012. It had not closed. It kept not closing for reasons that were explained differently at different times, and which Mitchell understood better than most because he was the relationship partner. The Meridian senior partner assigned to manage the firm's relationship with Thomas Kaplan and his organization. David Kaplan was Thomas Kaplan's son. Mitchell had understood without anyone explicitly telling him that the advancement of David Kaplan's career at Meridian was not unrelated to the advancement of the Kaplan engagement. This is not a thing anyone said out loud. It is the kind of understanding that exists between certain people in certain environments as a matter of subtext, felt, known, acted upon, never named. Mitchell acted upon it. What this meant for me was not immediately obvious and took me years to understand fully what it meant. In practice was this. In the committee discussions about my 2015 promotion, Mitchell had not fought for me the way he told me he had. He had, in fact, raised the client relationship concern himself, had introduced it into the conversation as a reasonable hesitation that the committee then adopted at its conclusion. The delay of my promotion by 18 months created an 18-month window in which David Kaplan could advance, could accumulate client credits, could establish himself at the principal level that I was not yet occupying. By the time I was promoted in 2017, David Kaplan was already a principal. The gap between us, which had not existed in 2013, had been manufactured. I found this out in 2021. The way I found it out is, in retrospect, almost banal. It did not involve a dramatic confrontation or an accidentally forwarded email or a whistleblower with a folder of documents. It involved a conversation at a retirement party. Margaret Chen retired from Meridian in October 2021 after 30 years. She had been the senior executive assistant to 3 consecutive managing directors, which meant she had attended as a functional presence most of the significant internal meetings of the firm for 3 decades. She knew things. Everyone at Meridian understood that Margaret knew things in the way you understand that certain people and organizations are the true repositories of institutional memory, not because they are important in the org chart sense, but because they are present consistently at the moments that matter. Margaret and I had a good relationship, not close. She was careful about closeness with people who were still active in the firm for obvious reasons, but warm. She had helped me navigate several internal situations over the years with advice that was delivered obliquely but was always accurate. I trusted her judgment the way you trust the judgment of someone who has watched a lot of people make mistakes and has drawn conclusions from the watching. At her retirement party in the function room of a restaurant on Peachtree Street, after most of the speeches had been given and the room had loosened into the specific ease of an event that is nearly over, Margaret found me at the bar and said she wanted to tell me something before she left. She said, "I've been thinking about whether to say this for a long time. I'm going to say it because I'm leaving and it won't matter anymore, and because I think you deserve to know years ago." I said, "Okay." She said, "Mitchell didn't fight for you in 2015. I looked at her. She said she had been in the room. Not as a participant, as the administrative presence that managed scheduling and documentation for the committee. Invisible in the way that support staff are invisible at Meridian, which is to say completely, even to people who should know better. She told me what had happened in that meeting. Not everything. She was careful about what she shared and with whom, but enough. Mitchell had raised the client relationship concern. He had framed it as a reluctant observation from someone who genuinely believed in my potential, but had to be honest about the committee. He had been persuasive. He was always persuasive, she said. I don't know all of his reasons, but I know what he did. I stood at that bar and held my wine glass and felt something happen to my understanding of the previous 6 years that I don't have a clean word for. Not shock, I have thought about why it wasn't shock, and I think it's because some part of me had always sensed something slightly off, a note that didn't quite resolve, and Margaret's words were the resolution of that note rather than the introduction of something new, more like recognition, arriving late, but arriving. I thanked her. She squeezed my arm. She went to say goodbye to someone else, and 3 weeks later, she was gone from the firm, and the things she had told me stayed with me the way things stay with you when you're not yet ready to do anything with them. I spent 4 months doing nothing. I went to work. I managed my clients. I sat in meetings with Mitchell and said the things that needed to be said and listened to him say the things he said and watched his face for something I hadn't looked for before, a tell, a flicker, something that would confirm or complicate what Margaret had told me. I didn't find it. Mitchell was too good for tells. What I did during those 4 months was think carefully, slowly, in the way I approach complex client problems, by gathering information before reaching conclusions, by testing hypotheses against available evidence, by trying to separate what I knew from what I believed and what I believed from what I wanted to believe. I thought about David Kaplan. He had made partner in 2019, 2 years ahead of what the standard timeline would have suggested. The Kaplan private equity engagement had closed in 2018, a major win for the firm, announced with significant internal fanfare, with Mitchell's name prominent in the announcement. I had noted these things at the time and had not connected them. Now I connected them. I thought about what Margaret had told me and whether it was possible she was wrong, misremembering, or interpreting what she'd seen through a lens that distorted it. I thought about this seriously because I did not want to act on something that was a single person's account of a meeting that had happened 6 years ago. But Margaret Chen had spent 30 years in those rooms specifically because she was reliable and precise, and the firmness with which she had chosen to speak after years of choosing not to told me something about her confidence in what she was saying. I thought about Mitchell, about 8 years of what I had understood as mentorship, and was now understanding as something more complicated, genuine in some ways. I still believed that, but serving purposes I had not fully seen, about the lunches and the feedback and the introductions, all of which had been real and useful. And also, it was now clear, selected, and managed in ways that served his interests alongside mine. I thought about what I was owed and by whom and what, if anything, could be done about it. In February 2022, I requested a meeting with Elaine Cho. Elaine had become managing director in 2018. She was rigorous and direct and had a reputation for not being interested in political theater, for wanting things named plainly and dealt with plainly, which was uncommon enough in a firm like Meridian that people commented on it. I had worked with her on 2 engagements and respected her. I believed, going into the meeting, that she would hear what I had to say and respond honestly. I told her what Margaret had told me. I told her about the Kaplan connection, the private equity engagement, David's parentage, the timeline. I presented it the way I would present a client finding. Here's what I observed. Here's the evidence. Here's the conclusion it suggests. Here's what I don't know. Elaine listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How long have you known this?" I said, 4 months. She said, "Why are you telling me now?" It was a good question. I had thought about it. I said, because I'm a principal and I'm next up for partner consideration and I'm not willing to go through that process without knowing whether it's clean. She said, "That's fair." She did not tell me she was surprised. She did not tell me she had no knowledge of any of what I was describing. She said she would look into it, and she asked me not to discuss it with anyone else in the firm while she did. I said I hadn't discussed it with anyone. She nodded. The meeting was 22 minutes long. What happened over the next 3 months, I know partly from what Elaine told me and partly from things I pieced together afterward from other sources, and I want to be honest about which is which. What Elaine told me, she had reviewed the 2015 promotion committee records, which were more detailed than most people knew, because Elaine had instituted thorough documentation processes when she became MD specifically to create accountability in processes that had historically operated on the basis of informal consensus. The records supported what Margaret had described. Mitchell had introduced the client relationship concern. The committee had adopted it without significant pushback. She told me this directly in a second meeting in April, reviewed the circumstances around the Kaplan engagement and David's advancement. She said she had found the timing notable. She said she was not in a position to prove a direct connection. She said the absence of provable direct connection was not the same as the absence of a connection. What I pieced together from other sources, Mitchell had known by March 2022 that something was happening. I don't know how he knew, whether Elaine spoke to him directly as part of her review or whether he had other information channels I wasn't aware of, but his behavior toward me changed in a way that was subtle enough to be deniable and clear enough that I noticed. The lunches stopped. He became slightly more formal in meeting. When I ran into him in the corridor, the warmth was present but calibrated differently, like a temperature adjusted by a degree or two, imperceptible to anyone who hadn't known the previous setting. He never mentioned any of it to me directly, not once. In May 2022, I was informed that I was being put forward for partner consideration in the next cycle. This was earlier than the standard timeline. I had expected to be considered in 2023. The acceleration was presented to me by Elaine as a reflection of my performance and client record. She did not connect it explicitly to our February conversation. I accepted it as both things at once, which I think was what it was. The partner vote happened in September 2022. I was made partner. Mitchell was not on the committee that year. He had 3 months earlier announced a planned transition. He would be moving to a senior advisory role, stepping back from day-to-day client work, reducing his committee responsibilities. The announcement was framed as a natural evolution, a senior partner choosing to take a less active role as he approached the later stages of his career. It was received that way internally. I received it differently. I do not know whether Mitchell's transition was connected to Elaine's review. I do not know whether he was asked to step back or whether he stepped back because he understood that the ground had shifted. I do not know whether anyone ever said to him directly what he had done, named it, confronted him with it, required him to account for it. I asked Elaine, once obliquely, and she gave me an answer that was technically responsive and entirely uninformative, which told me that whatever had happened between them was not something she was going to share with me. I have accepted this. It took a while to accept it, but I have. Mitchell sent me a note when I made partner. A handwritten card, which was his style. He had always been a sender of handwritten cards, a habit I had once found charming and now found difficult to categorize. The card said he was glad to see the promotion, that he had always believed I would get there, that Meridian was lucky to have me. I read it several times. I looked for something in it, an acknowledgement, a fissure, something that suggested he understood that I knew what he had done. I did not find it. The card was warm and genuine in its surface and entirely sealed. I put it in a drawer. I haven't thrown it away. I'm not sure why. I see Mitchell occasionally. Meridian is a large firm, but not so large that senior people become invisible, and he still comes in for certain meetings, certain client events, certain moments where his institutional history makes his presence useful. When I see him, we are cordial. He asks about my clients. I ask about his health, which is fine as far as I know. We do not have lunch. I think about what I would say to him if I had the chance to say anything, and I have not arrived at an answer. Not because I don't know what I feel. I know what I feel, which is something that sits between anger and a kind of cold disappointment that has never fully warmed. But I don't know what saying it would accomplish or for whom, or whether the accounting I want is one that could actually be delivered in a conversation with a man who had always been better at conversations than anyone else in the room. I think about the 18 months, what I did in them, the work, the client relationships, the proof that I had built in response to a concern he had manufactured. I built real things in that time. The client relationships I developed to answer the committee's objection are some of the strongest I have. The skills I deepened are ones I rely on. The Mitchell-shaped delay produced in me things that would not otherwise exist. I don't know what to do with that, whether it changes anything about what he did, or whether it simply means that some situations produce outcomes that are irreducibly mixed, damage and growth arriving together, impossible to fully separate. I have been a partner for 2 years now. I'm good at the job. I have 3 people I sponsor the way Mitchell sponsored me, which is to say, I show up for them and tell them the truth and fight for them in rooms they're not in and do not, under any circumstances, manufacture the concerns I then pretend to have fought against. Whether I do this because of what happened or in spite of it or simply because it's the right thing, I'm not sure the distinction matters. David Kaplan is still at the firm. He is a partner 2 levels above me, which is a function of the head start he was given, and the years that have compounded on top of it. We have a professional relationship that is functional and unrevealing. He does not know what I know. I don't know what he knows. We sit in meetings together and are competent and civil and say nothing to each other that could not be repeated. Margaret Chen sends me a card every Christmas from Savannah, where she retired. She never references our conversation at the party. I never reference it either. Once a year, she writes that she hopes work is going well and that she thinks of me. And I write back that work is going well and that I think of her too, which is true. Elaine Cho is still managing director. She runs the firm with the same rigor she brought when she arrived, which has made Meridian a different place in the years since. More documented, more accountable, more legible in its decisions. Not perfect. No institution is perfect, but different. I don't know whether what happened to me was common or unusual at Meridian. I don't know how many other 18-month delays exist in other people's histories, manufactured by other people for other reasons, leaving no paper trail except in the memory of someone who happened to be in the room. I suspect the answer is more than I would like to think about. Here's what I know. I know that I'm a partner at a firm I have worked at for 14 years, and that the work I do is good, and that the people I sponsor are developing, and that my clients trust me in a way that is not performance, but is the real thing, built over time by showing up correctly again and again. I know that I lost 18 months to something that was done to me deliberately, and that I cannot get those months back, and that what I built in them was real, even though the reason I had to build it was not. I know that Mitchell Graves is a complicated person who was genuinely useful to me and genuinely harmful to me at different times, and that these two things do not cancel each other out and cannot be resolved into a single, clean assessment. I know that I am not required to resolve them. I know that I can hold the useful and the harmful separately, acknowledge both, and not decide between them. I know that Margaret Chen told me the truth at a party at significant personal cost. Not financial cost, she was leaving anyway, but the cost of breaking a discretion she had maintained for years. I have thought about why she did it, and I think the answer is simple. She thought I deserved to know. She thought the truth about what had happened to me belonged to me, even if it arrived late. She was right. What I don't know is whether any of this constitutes a story with a lesson. People tell stories like this, and sometimes the lesson is clear. Trust yourself, watch for the signs, be careful who you trust. But I trusted Mitchell for 8 years, and I was right to trust him for most of them, and wrong only about the part that I couldn't see from where I was standing. The thing that got me was not naivety. It was the limit of what any person can know about another person's calculations. I still don't know exactly what he thought, whether he believed at some level that what he was doing to me was acceptable, a necessary adjustment, a small cost absorbed by one person for the benefit of the firm's larger interests. Whether he felt anything about it, whether he thought about me during those 18 months the way I think about him now, whether the handwritten card was simply what it appeared to be or was something else, an acknowledgement in the only language he had available, which was the language of warmth and form and no explicit content. I won't ask him. I have decided that I go to work, I do the job, I sponsor the people who need sponsoring and fight for them in rooms they're not in, and tell them the truth, even when the truth is not what they hope to hear. I have lunch with my team on Fridays. I go home to my apartment and I read and I call my sister. And I think sometimes about Mitchell and about the 18 months and about what it costs to trust someone and what it costs not to. I don't have a clean answer. I'm not sure there is one.